Um, Dr. Gile is a teacher, writer, and speaker. He's written around 15 different articles, and he's given a variety of talks, both online and in person. His interests lie primarily in early modern social history and the ecclesiastical history of the late 16th to early 17th century, with a particular focus on the local history of North Oxfordshire. And previous articles, some of which have appeared in the ECHA newsletter, include Marian shrines, iconoclasm, Catholic recusancy, the Oxfordshire Rising of 1549, and the Fermor family of North Oxfordshire. He's particularly keen on promoting the study of the history of Catholic recusant women in the early modern period, and he spoke on that earlier this year to the Leicestershire Ordinariate. His talk for you this evening, on this very historical anniversary, the 5th of November, is St. Nicholas Owen, Priest Hyde Builder. And without further ado, I will hand over to our speaker for this evening. Thank you, Dr. Gile.
Very much. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to be talking about Priest Hyde and Nicholas Owen this evening. So the question is, what do we know about him, really, and how do we know it? I suppose it's the same with all kind of historical figures. But we've been thinking over the weekend about All Saints and All Souls and things like that. So it's important that we kind of think about these characters from our country's history. So I pose a question for you this evening, really. How would you feel if your religious faith was banned, was illegal, you weren't allowed to practice it, you weren't allowed to baptize your children, access to sacraments, or even receive the last rites? But this is a situation that people were in Elizabethan England and under James I as well, when Catholicism was illegal, was unfortunately banned by the authorities for lots of different reasons. So talk this evening anyway is on Nicholas Owen, and you can see the pictures that are there, some of the pictures. We don't really know exactly what he looked like, and that's part of the problem with the lack of information. We've only got bits of descriptions and bits of information, but we don't have portrait pictures and things of that sort. But we do know some things anyway. So according to contemporary information that we know, reports, he was barely larger than a dwarf, or he was certainly a small of stature. Suffered from a hernia and a limp, and one leg having been crushed by an accident with a horse. The horse fell on him and his leg was set by somebody, I think at an inn, and it never set properly, and he never walked very well after that. He kind of limped around. So he traveled around the countryside. He had false names. One of them was Little John, and he used other pseudonyms as well in his travels for obvious reasons. So this is kind of what we're talking about this evening anyway. So the talk aims to show that Nicholas Owen, who may have joined the Society of Jesus as the Jesuits as a lay brother, but that's not absolutely certain, went on to construct the best examples of priest hides in England. It's impossible to know how many priest hides were constructed and where they were all located, as at the time it was highly secret information. We know that some hiding places in the English Midlands have been attributed to Nicholas Owen, who devoted the greater part of his life to constructing these places to protect the lives of persecuted priests. With incomparable skill, Owen knew how to conduct priests to a place of safety along secret passages, to hide them between walls and in hidden recesses. With great ingenuity, he so disguised the entrances to these as to make them most unlike what they really were. Unsurprisingly, he kept these places so close a secret that he would never disclose to another person the place of concealment of any Catholic, let alone an agent of the crown. He alone was both the architect and builder, and the locations were secret. One thing is certain, though: Owen's skillfully crafted priest holes saved many lives during the period of religious turmoil and persecution. Much of what we know about Nicholas Owen comes from the writings of Father John Gerard, who published an autobiography of Elizabethan which was translated from Latin 1951 by Karaman. So, and this little picture here, this is a picture from about 1840, possibly Guy Fawkes, but it's only a sort of a picture somebody did in 1840, so it's not any kind of genuine picture there. Oh, and there's just a picture there, a bit of costume drama. This is from Gunpowder, the BBC TV show that was on a while back, and I think it's probably been repeated again. You can imagine it's Elizabeth on the right with the ginger hair. The character with the beard is Walsingham. As I was telling William earlier, I know this actor. I've known this actor for many years. He's an old friend of mine, and he doesn't normally look like that either. But anyway, it's just to give you an idea of sort of costumes of the time and that sort of thing. And but he's meant to be representing Walsingham in that anyway. So during the reign of Elizabeth I, Catholicism was outlawed, and those who practiced it faced harsh fines and torturous punishments, often leading to their deaths. Many Catholics refused to align their beliefs with those of the monarch, because basically by law you had to be the same religious faith as the monarch. That was the law, and instead some of the people tried to practice their Catholicism, but unfortunately wasn't great for some of them, really. Protestantism became the state religion as we know under Elizabeth I, and the intertwining of religious and political allegiance to the English monarch made the practice of the Catholic faith rather difficult for them. A bit of description of what Catholics were, and I won't read all of this anyway, but sundry wicked and seditious persons, I'm sure that's accurate, calling themselves Catholics and being indeed spies and intelligencers, not only for Her Majesty's foreign, whatever, but and so it goes on. Basically, the idea was that they use words like detestable and devilish and pretext of religion and conscience and so on. Seduced Her Majesty's subject. By seduce, they just meant turn them into Protestants, really. So that was really what they were meaning by that. And according to the law, every person shall receive, receive, relieve, and so on. Any of these priests, they would be enemies of the state. They would suffer death, possibly charged with treason and so on. This comes from Dodd's Church History of England by Tierney. So you can see the picture basically of what was going on. Nicholas Owen was a son of a carpenter. He lived in Oxford, and as a young child they moved to near where the castle is today, the old prison, in other words, in Oxford. And his father is a carpenter. His older brothers were more academic. I think at least one of them, if not two of them, went to St. John's College. One of them became a priest, I believe. But for Nicholas, he was happy to work with wood. So he trained as a carpenter or a joiner, probably a joiner, and learned to make furniture, which was a very, very useful skill to have. This is a possible picture of him, but again, it's only possible, it's only surmised, it's not, it's not something that's accurate or whatever. So this is kind of the situation. Now, we know a bit from original sources, and I don't know whether you can see that. This is the book of by John. This is by the autobiography of Elizabeth and John Gerard by Philip Karaman, 1951. So that's the kind of original source. So we know that's true. And another thing that's also true is this book as well, Narrative of the Gunpowder Plot, again by Father John Gerard. So again talks about Nicholas Owen there. And there's other books, secondary sources, things like this lovely book by Philip Karaman, again, same author, on Henry Garnet and the Gunpowder Plot. So that's a really good book. And another good book, but secondary source, Nicholas Owen by Tony Reynolds, really good book there. And finally, Secret Hiding Places by Michael Hodgetts. Now, Paul Hodgetts, his son, will be talking at our day conference on Saturday, this Saturday in London. So if you're interested in learning more about priest hides, he's the person to ask, really. So anyway, so much of what we know then comes from those sort of original sources, basically. So we know he was short, we know he had disabilities, we know he was a carpenter, we know he kind of worked alone. He met Father Edmund Campion at some point, when he was in Oxford. And as we know, Edmund Campion put his 10 reasons on the benches at St Mary the Virgin Church, which led to a big hoo-ha with the Anglicans and basically led to his arrest at Lyford Grange in Berkshire shortly afterwards. And we know that Owen knew Campion and possibly did things for him, possibly assisted him in some ways as well. But of course, we know that Campion was arrested and put into prison and eventually executed. But this seems to have had some effect on Owen and made him convinced that he had to serve the priests and work with them and serve them as a sort of servant, and then also to build these hides that we talked about as well. So we know where some of these hides are, and we'll talk about these during the talk, but we don't know where all of them are. We really have no idea. Major reason is that they weren't recorded at the time for obvious reasons, but Harvington Hall is the best example that you can find of them. So that's sort of, if you want to go and see them, Harvington Hall is the place to go, basically. So let's move on. Owen was first arrested in 1582. So at that time, as I say, it was illegal to practice the faith and to hide priests and so on. So Edmund Campion, we know, was found guilty of treason, but Owen seems to have got away with things for a time anyway. But the wealthy Catholic families were trying to find ways of hiding these priests, and Nicholas Owen was the right kind of person to actually be there to help them. So this is possibly Edmund Campion, as best we know anyway about him. So during the reign of Elizabeth I, the Catholic gentry particularly had to come up with these really ingenious ways of hiding the priests from the priest hunters. And the sheriffs and the local authorities and so on, the agents of the crown were actually after these priests all the time. There were informers everywhere as well. People on the estates were informing, servants were informing, all sorts of things. And fugitives were moving from these house to house to try to evade from being caught. So the mission of Nicholas Owen was to aid the Jesuit and the seminary priests in any way that he could, given his abilities and his station in life. He acted as a servant to priests such as Father Edmund Campion, Father John Gerard, Father Henry Garnet. In addition, he used his carpentry and joinery skills to build hiding places for those priests and their mass equipment. Around the time of the Spanish Armada in 1588, priest hides were often poorly constructed and easily found. In that year, 17 priests were put to death by the authorities, and the situation was desperate. Following the Act of Uniformity in 1559 and subsequent legislation, the situation looked bleak for Catholics. The Catholic cause was still said to be strong in Oxford, which may account for Nicholas Owen's strong faith. In July 1586, a conference was held at Harleyford Manor near Marlow, which set out the new plan to hide priests in manor houses and safe houses and move them frequently. Mention should be made at this point of the brave women, the wives, the unmarried women, the widows, who took part in this plan too. An example of a safe house was at Finsbury Fields, where a remote house was used. Silence was maintained during the day and no fires lit until darkness had come. A priest hide was constructed in the cellar and spaces for massing stuff created. At Hindlip House in Worcestershire, Nicholas Owen was put to work using his carpentry skills to build a hide for priests. For the next few years, Owen moved from place to place with priests, building hides in some of the houses he was sent to. Owen's favoured locations appear to have been behind fireplaces and under stairs. The pursuivants were men who could judge if an interior wall looked shorter than an exterior wall, so Owen had to be very careful as to where he located the priest hides. Sometimes he created a secret space which could be quickly found out, but not the real hiding place for a priest. Owen's hides were always different. Discovering one in one house would not help a searcher find a hide in another place. The work of Little John in particular is particularly impressive when one considers he was of diminutive size and walked with a limp with a leg that was badly set following a fracture when a horse fell on him. He also had a hernia, but none of this prevented him from working alone and in secret, usually during the night, to break down stone walls and reconstruct them in such a way as to create secret spaces that were almost impossible to find if you did not know where to look. He made false entrances in fireplaces and staircases, trapdoors, sliding doors, and in one case at Speke Hall near Liverpool, a crawl space above a ceiling accessed by a rope ladder in a small space at the side of a bedroom. He is said to have favoured sites away from outside walls and seems to have had the ability to think in 3 dimensions and in curves. Owen's favoured locations seem to have been behind fireplaces and under stairs. To provide cover for his principal work of constructing priest hides, Owen would always engage himself with other obvious works by day, only conducting the real work by night. So by day, he was a workman just building walls, repairing things and that sort of thing. And by night, by candlelight, he would actually construct these hides under stairs and various different places. This must have been exhausting, not to mention that he would generally work unaided and would be engaged in substantial physical work in probably fairly small confined spaces. While the hides built by others were often simple trapdoors or hidden doors covered with furnishings or other floor coverings, Owen's constructions were recognized because of the ingenuity of their construction. So that's a kind of situation that we've got at the moment. So it tells you on the screen about Harvington, for example, and the Great Staircase there, and so on. So if you visit Harvington, you can actually see some of these amazing hides that he's got there. So I'd recommend that. So the pursuivants employed craftsmen who could judge if an interior wall was different from an exterior wall. So he had to be a lot cleverer, basically, than the people who were actually trying to find where these priest hides were. Hiding places at Harvington are the finest examples in England, and 4 of them, all sited round the Great Staircase, show the trademarks of Owen, the master builder. He was known to have stayed there around 1588. Baddesley Clinton in Warwickshire was a safe house for Catholic priests and home to the Jesuit priest Henry Garnet for almost 14 years. It too boasts several priest holes built by Nicholas Owen. One hiding place is just 114 centimetres high. It's in the roof space above a closet off a bedroom. Another is at the corner of the kitchen where visitors to the house today can see through to the medieval drain where Father Garnet was hidden. Access to this hiding place was through the garderobe shaft in the floor of the room above. A hiding space beneath the library floor was accessed through the fireplace in the great parlour. They are sometimes built as an offshoot from a chimney. Another favourite entrance was behind panelling such as Ripley Court in North Yorkshire. Others were adapted from garderobes, for example at Chesterton Hall near Cambridge. Other places were known examples of his priest hides were at Oxburgh Hall, Norfolk, Houghton Court, Baddesley Clinton, both in Warwickshire. At Houghton Tower in Lancashire, one priest hole was only discovered when an electrician fell into it. And at Astley Hall, Chorley in Lancashire, a priest hole was only discovered as recently as 2004. There's evidence that Owen also stayed at Sawston Hall, Haddington Court in Worcestershire, and other places. Father John Gerard describes borrowing Little John, as Owen was sometimes known, from Father Garnet to a house in order to construct hides along with a man called Hugh Sheldon. First thing in the morning, the searchers arrived, Sheldon was arrested, but Owen managed to slip away unnoticed on that occasion. So there's some more pictures, possible pictures, John Gerard, for example, but again, we don't really know what he really did look like, but it's a kind of supposition in a way. So here's some of the mentions of some of the places there on the screen that I mentioned. Nobody knows for certain how many of the hides were actually built by Owen and exactly where they were. I mean, it is possible many have been lost. We don't really know. We we think that he operated all over the country, the Midlands, Lancashire, Yorkshire, East Anglia. He may have worked in Oxfordshire. He may even have constructed a priest hide in the village where I live, because one was discovered in about 1850 in the roof space of the manor house, which is 2 minutes walk from here. Unfortunately, it's not there. The manor house is there, but the hide isn't. But it was found there. And in a house nearby, about 3 miles away, a priest hide was discovered as described as well at the time. But again, the house is gone, so it's difficult to actually ascertain whether it's true or not. And there's some other suggestions of places: Snore in Norfolk, Abbots Salford, Huddington, Irnham in Lincolnshire, and so on and so forth. So lots of different possible places. And here's a nice picture of a place you might know, National Trust property, and William definitely will know this. So we know that there were priest hides here. There is, for example, one in one of the towers you can see there. And when I was there a little while ago, some staff asked me whether I thought it was Nicholas Owens, and I said, I don't think it is, because it seems too obvious and too easy to find. But there was a range of buildings roughly where the camera is, which have been lost, and that's quite possibly where there were priest hides at Baddesley Clinton. So, but nobody knows for absolute certain. But we know that he was there, and we know there were priest hides. So that's kind of Coton I meant. So Coton Court in Warwickshire is one of the places that you will find priest hides. Baddesley Clinton, lovely photograph here. You can see the moat there and the entrance there. We know that this is where there's a very well-constructed priest hide, which is unusually underground. It's the one that can be accessed. Well, there's more than one, but one can be accessed through this garderobe tunnel underground. And we know that on one occasion, priests were hidden there. About 9 or 10 priests were hidden there when the pursuivants were there, and they didn't find them. It's thought that one of the servants snitched on them because this was a meeting of Jesuits. And how would the authorities know that this was happening? So they raided about 5 or 6 a.m., but they weren't actually able to find them. So, but this is where the priests were hiding, these big houses. They sometimes moved on a daily basis from one of these houses to another one. And here's Harvington, where you get the best examples of the priest hides that there are. I don't know whether many of you have actually been to Harvington. Well worth a visit. They have a history week each year, which is very good in June. Lots of good speakers. They, at the moment, are having a gunpowder plot drama thing going on in the evenings there as well. But there's some excellent priest hides anyway. So the authorities continued to search for Catholic priests up and down the country. These searches could go on for days and days at a time, whilst the priest was hidden in a chamber, and they had to remain absolutely still and silent. Sometimes they didn't have food either. Surprisingly, there's no record of Harvington Hall ever being searched, though, which is surprising, really, considering what we know about it. The centre of operations for hiding priests in Worcestershire and the Welsh Marches was Hindlip Hall, the home of Humphrey's friend Thomas Habington, where the Jesuit Edward Alcorn arrived in 1590. Although Hindlip was demolished in 1814, descriptions of the hides there show a striking similarity to those that survive at Harvington. So this is Harvington. This is a cross-sectional diagram of Harvington showing some of the hides that they have there actually in different places. Staircase and behind paneling in the library, what was a library as well, various things. And people have done lots of videos on YouTube about these, which are well worth looking at. Priest hide at Harvington, one that you can kind of drop into, basically it's a trapdoor, essentially. So some of them were like that, some of them weren't. The ones behind the fireplace are sometimes quite ingenious. Braddocks near Thaxted in Essex, sometimes referred to as Broad Oaks, because Braddocks just is shortened for Broad Oaks. And we know that he was there, Owen was there, and that he constructed a priest hide there as well. And Tower of London, which we'll mention shortly. So at Hindlip, it's where Garnet, Owen, and Olcorn were all captured in 1606, just after the gunpowder plot. Apparently, the walls of the mansion were riddled with secret chambers and passages. There was little fear of being run to earth with hidden exits everywhere. So they must have thought wainscoting, solid brickwork, or stone hearth were used as possible places to hide a priest. Tensions were heightened because of the failed plot, and the authorities were out to get as many Catholic sympathizers as they could. You can imagine after the gunpowder plot, things really picked up in terms of the persecution of the Catholics. The house was surrounded by 100 men at daybreak on Monday, the 20th November, and the searchers began to rip the house apart. Owen may have been starved out of his own hide on the fourth day of the 12-day search, during which he and a companion, Ralph Ashley, had nothing to eat except one apple between them. They seem to have just been discovered, creeping along a gallery, possibly to distract attention from the two priests, Father Garnet and Father Olcorn, who were also hiding there. But after 8 days, the priests were found and also arrested, and there would be no escape for Nicholas Owen. Father Olcorn and Ralph Ashley were later executed. Now, the significance of the Tower of London was obviously where prisoners were kept. Now, John Gerard managed to escape from the Tower of London in October 1597 in an astonishing escape. And the escape was planned, almost certainly, and executed by Nicholas Owen. And this is remarkable that a priest was able to escape from the Tower of London under the noses of the authorities overnight, but he did. I think the story is that they tried it one night and the boat collided with one of the piers of the or a jetty or something or other, and they had to abandon it. And then the following night they tried again, but they managed to get a rope from the tower where Father Gerard was actually kept and attach it somehow or other, and it ran down diagonally from the tower to where the boat was. And although Father John Gerard had been tortured, he'd been hung by his wrists, which was a favourite punishment, torture in the Tower of London, he managed to actually get down the rope and onto the boat and escape. And that was almost certainly engineered by Nicholas Owen. And I suspect that Anne Vaux was also involved in this as well. And the Vaux sisters were the great Recusant sisters who are very well known for their work with the priests, particularly with John Gerard and Father Garnet. So Hindlip, as I said, was the important place and one of the important centres where they were kept. And this is a picture possibly of Hindlip Hall. It's a sort of a sketch, probably from the time. It doesn't exist anymore. It burned down in the 19th century. And interestingly, the West Mercia Police Headquarters is on the site of it now. But that's where a lot of the police hides were. James I, as we know, was the king who succeeded Elizabeth I. And he at first said that he would be tolerant of Catholics when he was asked, but it's quickly changed. And unfortunately, as we know, with the gunpowder plot, it all went horribly wrong. Guy Fawkes, Thomas Catesby, and the other plotters plotted to overthrow Parliament, blow up the king, and so forth. Two priests knew about it. Father Tesemond and Father Garnet did know about it, urged him not to carry it out. They basically couldn't say anything because it was under the seal of the confessional, but they did urge him to stop and to rethink and so forth. But unfortunately, as we know, it didn't happen. So why did it happen? Well, the persecution of Catholics was just so bad that some of these hotheads decided they couldn't tolerate it any longer, and they decided that something terrible had to happen. But as we know, the result was that, that a lot of these priests then ended up being arrested and killed because of what they had actually done. So the gunpowder plot was a terrible disaster. A lot of people think today that the authorities must have known more about it than they actually let on. And that's not provable, but it's certainly a theory. Because the spies, well, the government spies, Crown spies, were all over the place. And the fact that that Fawkes was able to get hold of gunpowder, which was meant to be controlled by the government, and then stick it in a cellar or a room underneath Parliament without anybody even noticing, seems so far-fetched. that it's almost unbelievable. So that's a sort of a good question as to what actually happened. Anyway, so what happened was basically Owen was arrested, was captured as a result of the searches after the gunpowder plot. So the authorities, particularly Robert Cecil, were incredibly pleased by their success, and were supposed to be greatly overjoyed because they knew that Owen had been constructing the hides, and they knew that if they could torture him and get him to talk, he'd reveal names, places, all sorts of things, implicate an awful lot of people. They'd round up even more Catholics, close down these priest hides, and be generally successful. So Owen had escapes before, but unfortunately this one it wasn't successful. So these are just some examples actually of possible hides. This is a place called Salford Prior, and these are sort of sketches of what the sort of hides might have been like in some of the houses. In a sort of like a cupboard, for example, which kind of hinged upwards or sideways. And the one in the manor house near where I live was described as being rather like that. So it could well be one that was created by Owen. Now, I would show you a map showing where the priest hides are, but I can't get it to show. But there is, Paul Hodgetts has actually done an interactive Google map, which actually shows where some of these priest hides are. He's got green dots and red dots, basically to signify where they know that there were hides and other places where they think there were hides. And it's well worth looking at anyway, but I can't fortunately show it on a slide at the moment. Anyway, so the authorities continued to search for Catholic priests up and down the country. And these searches could just go on for days and days, searching for more and more of these priests. We know Hindlip's no longer there, but we know that that was one of the main places where there were hides anyway. So why is Owen a very important person? Well, he was brave and he did incredible things. Even under torture, he didn't reveal the secrets of where the hides were, where the priests were hidden. He gave virtually no information. And we know that they hung him by his wrists, unfortunately. This was sort of a favorite punishment at the time. They kind of hung them sometimes for hours on end, day after day after day, and until they talked. And so he was tortured. But according to Lord Cecil, the secret is to be wrung from him, but they couldn't manage to get the information. It was actually illegal to torture disabled people, and we know that Owen had a hernia and had a damaged leg as well. So he was first manacled by the wrist, suspended in chains from the ceiling. This resulted in his hernia bulging from his body to such an extent that his intestines were protruding. So Topcliffe, the man tasked with his torture, ordered that an iron plate be strapped to hold his insides in. It was this plate that eventually killed him, though. James I's agents wanted to know everything he knew about the network of safe houses. He wouldn't tell them. He told them what they already knew, and that was all. So he told them basically things that he knew that they knew, so it was basically nothing new at all. And he didn't implicate anybody. According to the Jesuits in Britain website, we have two records of Owen's confessions under torture. For example, on March 1st, 1666, he confesses that he has known and sometimes attended Henry Garnet, the provincial of the Jesuits, for around 4 years. He confesses that he was at the house of Thomas Throckmorton, called Coton, at the beginning of November last year, when the Lady Digby was there, and by the watch that was in town, they knew that Robert Catesby, Thomas Percy, and the rest of the gunpowder plotters were up in arms. That All Saints' Day last year, Garnet said mass at Coton House, and that at that mass there were around half a dozen people. That Henry Garnet was at Henlip, which is what they referred to Henlip as, the house of Thomas Abington, some 6 weeks before he was apprehended, and Hall, the Jesuit was there about 3 days before the house of Mr. Abington was searched. Owen refused to divulge any information, even after he was hung from his wrist for several hours at a time. And the result was that the plate cut into the hernia and ruptured it, causing him to bleed to death in his cell in the early hours of the 2nd of March, 1606. And this is a bit of gruesome pictures here, supposed pictures of torture of priests or others at the time. So they didn't always employ the actual rack. That was used sometimes for some of the prisoners, but hanging them from their wrist for hours on end, usually enough to get the information that they actually wanted. Anyway, Owen took his knowledge of priest hides to his grave, having divulged nothing of real value to his torturers. The official stance was that he had committed suicide by stabbing himself with the blunt knife given him to eat his meat. So they gave him a knife when he had to eat, and it was a blunt, round-ended knife. They somehow made out that he somehow stabbed himself in his abdomen, pulled out his own guts, and killed himself, which is the most ridiculous story you can ever imagine. And anyway, Nicholas Owen wouldn't have committed suicide. It's an unlikely story, as the torture had left him unable to even use his hands at all. And suicide for a Catholic was a mortal sin that would have endangered his soul. Since they had learned nothing from Owen and had killed him, the authorities covered up what they had done by holding an inquest and issuing the verdict that Nicholas Owen had, in fact, killed himself. People at the time didn't believe it. On the streets of London, people said, no, don't believe it, not true. But the authorities still peddled their story. So it says there about the Venetian ambassador, who said that public opinion holds that he died of tortures inflicted on him, which is true. The story of suicide is not true. The explanation of his death was even more strange, considering he was committed to his faith and the cause of the priest in England. As Father John Gerard later commented in his autobiography, the one I showed you earlier on, the book, they added calumny to murder, and that they had tortured him cruelly. Gerard comments that if Owen had not injured his neighbour by revealing secrets that would harm them, he certainly would not offend God by self-murder, concluding that the day of judgment will refute this calumny as well as others. Well, historians have done it too as well, because nobody actually believes this story. Anyway, he was buried in the grounds of the Tower of London. He was the immediate occasion of saving the lives of many hundreds of persons, both ecclesiastical and secular. It is true that many priests must have owed him their lives, and many Catholic families were able to receive the sacraments from a priest because of his work. And he was beatified by Pope Pius XI in 1929 and canonized by Pope Paul VI as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales in 1970, which we probably know. In the autobiography of Elizabethan, John Gerard says that no one did more good in assisting the labours of the priest than Owen did. He was the person who really did tremendous things. He was a backroom person, sort of backstage, if you like. He wasn't centre stage or anything of that sort, but he was absolutely integral to the whole thing. Just like the women were integral to the hiding of the priest and the moving of the priest from one thing to the other. So when we think of these times, we don't just think of John Gerard and Edmund Campion and others, the priests. We think of all the people who were behind them and helping them, building the hides and hiding them, and all sorts of other ways. His feast day, Owen's feast day, is celebrated on the 23rd of January in the Diocese of Birmingham and 22nd of March elsewhere. There's a church dedicated to him in Lancashire. And I think there might be one in America as well. There is today quite an interest in the Tudor houses in which St. Nicholas Owen built priest hides. Some are now tourist or pilgrimage sites such as Oxburgh Hall in Norfolk, Speke Hall near Liverpool, Baddesley Clinton, Harvington Hall in the Midlands, and so on. Visitors can crawl into priest holes and see how it would have felt. In a lot of these places, they probably won't let you. At Harvington, they won't let you actually do that. But the guy, Phil, who actually runs Harvington, he's actually been inside the priest hide for quite a few hours, 24, 36 hours at a time, I think, and filmed himself as well. And it was very unpleasant and claustrophobic experience, he said. So It's not something many people would want to do. But there are places, as I say, where you can visit these houses and you can actually see at least where they were anyway, even if you can't see much detail. So from a place of desperate refuge, it has become a highlight on a day trip or pilgrimage. Next time you're visiting a Tudor house and you're shown a priest hole, spare a thought for Nicholas Owen for his ingenious work and for his horrific and painful death and his steadfast faith. So that's for us to kind of ponder on, really, when we think about saints and all souls and the martyrs of England and Wales and so on. And here's a picture here of St. Joseph the Worker and St. Nicholas. In a way, maybe he should be a sort of patron saint of English workers. So that's maybe an idea, but just kind of a thought, really. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed our little talk this evening. Father Henry Garnet said of him, "I verily think no man could be said to have done more good of all those who laboured in the English vineyard. He was the immediate occasion of saving the lives of many hundreds of persons, both ecclesiastical and secular." So that really is Nicholas Owen, basically.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your fascinating talk. It's certainly given me plenty of ideas for future days out, and has told me a lot I didn't know already. Those of you who are veterans of these talks will know what comes next. And for those of you who don't, I'm going to tell you. If you would like to ask questions of our speaker, please do pop them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We have actually had a request already if the Google link could be put in the chat. If that's not possible, the Google link to the Priest Hides map by Paul Hodgetts.
Yeah.
If that isn't possible, you can actually find the link on the English Catholic History Association Facebook page if you search for it. It was posted up there a few months ago. While you're all thinking of additional things to put in the chat, and I will keep an eye on the box, I'll kick off if I may. I was wondering, Tim, you mentioned how the Owen family's Oxford background may well have contributed to their son Nicholas's steadfastness in the Catholic faith. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about why Oxford was such a centre for Catholicism at the time that he was growing up.
Well, Oxfordshire generally was kind of a centre of Catholicism anyway. So you've got South Oxfordshire, Stoner House, for example. North Oxfordshire, you've got Somerton Manor and Tusmore, for example, which are probably places where priests were moved to. You've got Blessed George Napier, for example, who was arrested at Kirtlington, taken to Lower Hayford before magistrates, then taken to Oxford Jail, and then executed. Unfortunately, after he offered to convert the judge, that didn't help at all. There was a lot of sympathy in Oxford University, a lot of the colleges of Catholicism. There were lots of inns in Oxford where Catholics met as well. The Mitre on the High Street was one of those places where Mass was easily available. The Mitre is still there. It's worth visiting in Oxford on the High Street. Nice pub. But they used to have Mass there, almost certainly in the cellar of there. The cellar is still there. I think people can get permission to actually go and visit it on occasion if they haven't got building work on. And there were other inns as well, for example, in Cornmarket, where Catholics used to meet. So you've got the sympathies of the people at the university and churches as well. You've got the priests coming and going from these priests like all over Oxfordshire, basically moving around through Oxford, around Oxford, and so on. So a lot of people had sympathies, and Oxfordshire generally was an area where there were quite a lot of Catholics. So you can see why he was, why he did what he did, basically, because he was in contact with speakers, visitors, priests, all sorts of people who were coming through Oxford, and that must have influenced him. And Campion definitely did. So that's kind of a bit about Oxford and Oxfordshire, really.
Thank you very much. questions from the audience. The first one from Laura is, where did you get this image of Saint Joseph and Nicholas Owen from? She says it's a beautiful one and was wondering where it comes from.
Just off the internet, like everything else. Google it, and it'll be there somewhere or other. So that's all I did. I just found Google Images or whatever. So I can't even remember where it's from, to be honest. It's an image from a church somewhere, or maybe in a church somewhere. But it's certainly on the internet somewhere or other. Yeah, but I can't remember where it is.
Thank you. There's another question here. Are there any focused efforts to scout out unidentified priest holes?
Well, not specifically, I don't think, but I mean, Michael Hodgetts, who wrote this book here, was the expert on it, and it's absolutely full of information about these things. And his son, Paul, has continued the work. This is a new edition of the book with new information, new photographs and things like that. And so Paul is on the lookout for anything like that, any information. But I don't think there's specifically sort of archaeological type searches. But from time to time, people may suggest, oh, there's this house or that house that either had a priest hide or they think might have a priest hide still. But I don't think there are that many people searching for these things really.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier about the variety of primary sources that you have for studying this topic.
Yeah.
And someone has asked, is John Gerard's autobiography a different manuscript to his narrative of the Gunpowder Plot?
No, there's different editions of the book. So it was published in 1951 as Autobiography of an Elizabethan, and then it was republished, I think, in the 70s under a different title. Diary of a Priest, or Autobiography of a Priest, or something like that, I think it was called. I used to have a copy of it, but I seem to have lost that, and I got hold of an original one from 1951 to replace it. So it's been released under different names, basically. So it's the same book. So, but there's the other book, which is the narrative of the Gunpowder Plot is a different book, and it's a very thick book. Again, it's by Karaman, I think, somewhere or other it says. Anyway, it's got Karaman's hand on it, I think. Edited by John Morris. It's a very long time ago, 1871. It says on there, originally published. But that's the narrative of the Gunpowder Plot. But the Autobiography of an Elizabethan is kind of is a really, really good source of information, and we know it's primary evidence because he's telling everybody what he did and what he saw and who was doing what or whatever. And that was translated from the Latin by Karaman in 1951, I think it was, and published. So obviously it wasn't published at the time, because otherwise the authorities. Somebody asked me that recently. Did they publish it at the time? No, because the authorities would have got hold of it and found exactly where they were hiding them. So no, it was hidden in an archive or something in Rome. Yeah.
Thank you. And a question here from Maria: what part of England has the highest number of hiding places for priests that have been found?
That's probably something that Paul Hodgetts could probably answer better at our day conference on Saturday. I'm not sure the answer to that. I mean, the number of Catholics, the sort of proportion of Catholics and that sort of thing, was more in Lancashire. There was a greater concentration of Catholics, but that doesn't mean to say there were more hides there. It doesn't necessarily correlate with that. But it's difficult to know because, as I say, a lot of them have gone. A lot of them we don't know about. Some of them are supposition. We know they're all spread out. That's all. We know that there's some in Oxfordshire, quite a few in Warwickshire, other parts of the Midlands, East Midlands, East Anglia, Yorkshire, like Ripley Castle. I've been Lancashire, Speke Hall near Liverpool. They're all over the place, but I'm not sure whether we know that much more about them than that. But we do know that there were priests were being hidden and were being moved, and they weren't being moved very far often. Often they were only moving short distances, but they had to constantly move. So, and some of the hides may have been in other buildings like pubs and inns and things, for all we know. We just don't know. There's more that we don't know than we do know, probably. So some of it is supposition. So we know a certain amount of facts and a certain amount of information, but we don't know everything at all. But Paul Hodgetts is the kind of expert on that because his dad wrote the book and he's brilliant on that. So he's kind of he knows a lot about it.
Okay. You mentioned that there
He'll
were
do a talk for us sometime as well, he said.
good. Well, yes, our AGM is the place to be if you're interested in this topic. Be there on Saturday, and you will learn more. You mentioned that there were other priest hide makers who were operating at in the same time period. Do you
Yes.
know anything more about those other people that you mentioned?
No, I asked Paul that question and he doesn't seem to know either. But there was some of them with pseudonyms. There was one who operated in Oxfordshire who went by the name of Badger. Now, I don't believe Badger was his real name at all. I think it's kind of, because Badgers burrow underground, so it's kind of a nickname. And he operated apparently in Oxfordshire, but which ones in Oxfordshire is difficult to tell. Which houses, because there's quite a few to choose from. So there were definitely others. There's no way that Nicholas Owen built them all. That would be impossible. He wasn't Superman, but he may have trained other carpenters and joiners, and it's quite possible that he did so, and that they were, perhaps he had apprentices who he trained up, and they went off to other places and built similar ones, or maybe they were just different people altogether. Maybe he never met some of them. They all operated in secret as well with false names and things like that. Who knows? We don't know really, but we know that Owen moved, with the priests, particularly Henry Garner, and moved from inn to inn and things like that, or safe house to safe house, all over the country, really. Often they were in London, actually. They weren't always in the countryside at all. One of the safest places to be was in London because there were so many people. And London was at the time the biggest city in Europe, or said to be the biggest city in Europe. There were plenty of places to hide in safe houses. So they moved to inns, they moved to houses that were rented in London. And you could be fairly anonymous in London as well, unless you were spotted by somebody who actually knew you. Remember, there's no pictures and portraits and things like that, so people didn't really know what people looked like. But unless they actually knew them in person, that would have been a bit dangerous. But one of the places they did move around was London, and as soon as one place was discovered, they moved to another place, and so on. It's like cat and mouse the whole time, really. And then when they couldn't, that was too difficult, they'd move out to Norfolk or to Lancashire or wherever else. Really, they were always moving, and always. It's kind of more like a spy story in a way, really. Sort of people pursuing, people searching, other people hiding and escaping, and things like that. It's a bit like a spy movie, really, in a way.
It would make a good film, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I'll just last one. Have any priest hides been found in Oxford college buildings?
No, I don't know of any. Don't know of any, because I think they would have been found or noticed. I think that would have been a bit too obvious, really. No, I don't think that's likely. Um, However, you can't say never, can you? So who knows? But I don't know anything about that at all. Yeah.
Well, maybe you're the man to find one. If you do let us know and write an article for the newsletter. Thank thank you very, very much. And thank you to everyone who's contributed questions. It's nice to see so many in the chat. And thank you again to our speaker
No problem.
and to our ECHA committee who they do all the work behind the scenes to make these talks possible. If you would like information about future talks, the best way to do that is to join the association, in which case you will get them all in a monthly e-newsletter. It's only £11 a year for an individual. It's terrific value for money, especially if you know how expensive heritage subscriptions are getting these days. Going forward, the place to be on Saturday morning, if you are in London, is the ECHA Day Conference, an AGM, where we will be having a talk on Elizabethan priest hides, and also another one by Monsignor Strange on the conversion of Cardinal Newman. It is being hosted at the very historic Our Lady of the Assumption and St Gregory Church on Warwick Street, which is the last surviving Catholic embassy chapel from penal times. It's well worth a visit. And going forward, our monthly talks continue. We have one in December on Margaret Moore, and we have talks booked well into next year as well. Full details of all of that are available on our website and will be featured on our social media and email newsletter nearer the time. Thank you all very much for attending. This talk is being recorded. You will be able to see it on our YouTube channel shortly. But from myself as Secretary of the Association, thank you all very much again, and goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye.